This is Comic Shenanigans, episode 1132, a conversation with Glenn Greenberg.
Ain't no stopping them shenanigans. No getting into shenanigans. All up in them shenanigans. 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 Shenanigans.
Welcome to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. I'm your host, Adam Chapman. This is episode 1132. It's another conversation with Glenn Greenberg, as Glenn comes on the show to talk about three particular books. We talk about Incredible Hulk versus Superman, which came out in the late 90s. We also talk about a Moon Knight miniseries that was also released in about 99. And then we also talk about a STARLORD miniseries done by Timothy Zahn of Star Wars fame. So this was a lot of fun to sit down once again with Glenn to talk about these particular books. They're all available. Well, not all. The Marvel ones are available in Marvel Unlimited. So I definitely recommend that people check them out before listening to this conversation. And then the Incredible Hulk versus Superman is also available more widely now. Well, relatively widely. It's at least, it exists in a collected format you can read. It's in the recent Marvel versus DC crossovers omnibus from a couple of years ago, which I just never thought would ever actually be reprinted anywhere. So, eventually all these things do. Eventually money wins out, and these things do get reprinted. So this was a lot of fun to have Glenn back on the show, just to chat about, his time in editorial, working on these particular books, what it was like putting them together. So this was, again, it's always a great time. If you want to check out Glenn's previous appearances on the show, you can check out episode 912, 940, 1007, 1028, and 1076. So it's nice to have Glenn back on the show because I think since 2021 he's been on every year. So, at least we keep that going. So again, thanks for listening to this episode. Let's jump right into the conversation with Glenn, but just in a moment, because you can also email us at comicshenanigans@gmail.com, rate the show on Apple Podcasts. Listen to us on Apple Podcasts, and also listen to us on Spotify. Now the housekeeping is out of the way, let's jump right into the conversation with Glenn. Enjoy. Glenn, welcome back to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for inviting me back. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely. So when I first reached out, I was like, we got to talk about Incredible Hulk versus Superman. But then you were very smart. You're like, well, there should be other things as well we should talk about. So I looked at two other projects that you had kind of suggested to talking about that you had had a hand in editing. And so I think chronologically, we maybe want to go through them first because I want to understand where you were as a person and where you were as an editor at that point as we get there. So if you don't mind, I'd love to start with STARLORD, which is a fascinating book. I recently reread it. I recently read it. I don't know if I had ever read it before. So I'm really curious about the genesis of a project like that. Like Timothy Zahn writing a Marvel book, doing something in space. Pretty cool idea. It's painted. It's very different for the time. So I'm very curious how that project even percolated.
Well, what was going on at the time was in the wake of Marvels by Alex Ross and Kurt Busiek. Marvel was really pushing to do a lot of painted projects. So we ended up doing a lot of painted projects. There were other projects that had the Marvels brand on them, even though they weren't technically really sequels to Marvels. We did a Spider-Man painted project or two and stuff like that. And so Tom Brevoort and I, because at the time I was still an assistant editor, I was on my way to becoming an associate editor, but I was still working under Tom Brevoort, and we were kicking around ideas like what kind of projects can we do? And we went back, I probably went back into the Marvel archives and just looked at properties that we really hadn't done anything with for quite a while. And I think the two that I came back with were Killraven and STARLORD. And Tom ended up doing Killraven somewhere down the line. I think he ended up doing it with Alan Davis when I was no longer in his office. But STARLORD was one where Tom didn't. I don't remember Tom having a strong feeling one way or the other. I think he was kind of like, hey, if you want to pursue this, go ahead. And what had happened was, I guess I could talk about this now. Enough time has gone by. I had come from book publishing. That was my job before I worked at Marvel. And what had happened was the editor of the X-Men at the time, Bob Harris, came to me and said, you came from book publishing. Do you know how I can get in touch with Timothy Zahn? Because at the time, Timothy Zahn was like a best-selling... I mean, he was very much of the moment because he was in the midst of... Or he had just finished writing those Star Wars books, the first 3 Star Wars books that he wrote, the so-called Zahn trilogy. Excuse me, he's Zahn. The Thrawn trilogy. But I guess it's by Zahn, so it's the Zahn-Thrawn trilogy. I guess we could call it that. And so he was really, really hot at the moment. So he said to me, Bob Harris said to me, do you know how I can get in touch with him? And I said, well, let me put out a couple of feelers to my contacts in the book publishing industry. Let me see what I can find. And so I did, and I ended up getting Timothy Zahn's information. I don't remember exactly how I did it because it was so long ago, obviously. But what happened was, for whatever reason, and it was certainly not intentional, it was certainly not out of any kind of malice or spite, I just never gave the contact information to Bob Harris. Either I forgot, or it got to the point where just trying to get in to see him, and he, maybe he just was never available for me to talk to. I don't remember what the circumstances were. Whatever the reason was, I ended up never giving him that information. And so what happened was, when Brevoort and I were looking for other projects to do, and STARLORD was on the list, I was like, well, Star Wars, STARLORD, they have nothing to do with one another. They kind of sound alike, but they're also science fiction oriented. Their properties, and quite frankly, if you actually read the Star Wars, the Star-Lord story that everybody remembers, the one by Chris Claremont and John Byrne, that's the one that everybody points to and says, that's, I was like, well, because in doing my research for coming up with a Star-Lord project, I went back and read all the Star-Lord stories. The original one by Steve Englehart and Steve Gann, I think it was. And then the Byrne Claremont one, and then the Doug Mensch stories. And so if you look at that Byrne Claremont story, there's a lot of Star Wars in there. There is. And in fact, they were doing Star Wars stuff before Star Wars did it. It was really incredible how much Claremont, in particular with the scripting, was able to anticipate a lot of the stuff that Lucas would do in the later Star Wars movies, anything after the original. So I was kind of like, there's something here. Maybe Timothy Zahn is the guy to do this, and we were looking for other people outside of the typical Marvel circle, just going back to the same guys over and over again. Here's a chance to do something a little different. So I reached out to Timothy Zahn, and I think the first question he asked me was, how did you get my contact information? Again, it was a very circuitous route. I don't remember what I told him, but we ended up kind of clicking. And I told him about the project that I had in mind, and he was interested. So I sent him copies of all of the previous Star-Lord stuff that had been done. Every Star-Lord story. Not that there was that much, but everything. And he came back to me, and instead of picking up where I think it was Doug Mensch and Tom Sutton had done the last Star-Lord story in like 1982, 83, in an issue of Marvel Preview, I think it was the title, or Marvel Premiere. I don't remember that kind of stuff anymore. But they left him off. It was a very kind of typical one-shot story, and that was it. There was nothing had been done since then. instead of coming back to me with, okay, we're going to pick up where that last story left off, and we're going to continue on with Peter Quill and the talking ship, and just take them into a new adventure, he decided to create a new Star-Lord. Not denying what had come in the past, but it's now years later, and Peter Quill has disappeared, and another character, a young character, comes in, finds the ship. So that's our anchor to the that's our link to the original stories. Finds the sentient ship. The sentient ship has amnesia, so it doesn't remember what happened to it or to Peter Quill. And this kid ends up having to, because of circumstances beyond his control, he has to put on the original costume. He has to take up the secret, the special weapon, the element gun, and pretend that he's the original Star-Lord and work with the sentient ship, Star-Lord's sentient ship, in this whole new adventure. And we drop a few clues as to where Peter Quill may be, and we end this self-contained story with, maybe if we do another story, maybe that will be the search for Peter Quill. Or we'll do another original, completely new story, and we'll drop more clues to where Peter Quill may be. And maybe we'll pick up Peter Quill in the third one, if we do a third one, kind of thing. And so that's really how it came along. I basically just gave all the ingredients to Tim, and Tim came back to me with what we got. And he just, he just jumped right in. As I remember it, he just wrote the whole thing, and basically turned the whole thing in all three scripts at the same time. I think he gravitated to the comic book format really quickly. I did some coaching. I coached him a little bit. In terms of how to break down, page, per page and panels per pages, and how to pace the issues that each one has a certain amount of action and character development, and break off at the right moment and all that kind of stuff. But it was more kind of like sort of a gentle pointing in the right direction. But he gravitated to everything like a duck to water. He just really latched onto the comic book format really, really, really quickly. And what I do recall is when we announced that we were doing Star-Lord by Peter Quill, I do seem to remember Bob Harris kind of like looking at me, kind of like, hey, I was supposed to work with him, not you, but that might just be paranoia on my part. But that's what I remember. Now, in terms of the painting stuff, there was a guy named Dan Lawless who was rising up in the comic book industry at the time. He had done some painted covers for the Savage Sword of Conan magazine, because Marvel was still publishing Conan at the time. I thought his stuff was great. I thought his stuff was really, really good. And I said to Brevoort, I said, what do you think of this guy? He might be looking for a chance to expand beyond covers in terms of his painting work. Because as I recall, he was doing regular comic book work also, like just, pencil and ink kind of stuff. I think he was doing stuff for Dark Horse. Maybe, I think he might have been doing a character called Ghost for Dark Horse Comics. But I wanted him for his painting, and I thought this would be a good opportunity for him to show off that he can do sequential artwork with his painting technique. And so Brevoort, said sure, and we reached out to Lawless, and he was up for it. And before you knew it, we were off and running. And Zahn, like I said, his scripts were airtight. And we sent the scripts to Lawless, and it was just up to Lawless to turn in the pages, and his stuff was terrific. I do remember him asking if there was a chance that we could, he really wanted the book to succeed, God bless him, and so he asked if we could somehow fit Wolverine in somehow, and I said, nah, I don't think Wolverine's going to work here, Dan. What I was explaining to him was, we didn't consider Star-Lord to be existing in the Marvel Universe proper. We felt that because if you read those original stories, there's no way it fits into them. We looked at it as this is like an alternate or parallel universe with a different Earth, a different history, no superheroes. I think I explained that to him, and so he withdrew the suggestion at that point. But I do remember him saying, "Can we somehow get Wolverine into this?" Which I thought was hilarious. We did it. Unfortunately, at the last minute, it was published. The decision was made to publish it on paper that did not hold the artwork the way we had intended it to. It was supposed to be on slick paper where the colors and the line work would really pop and really look bright and exciting and just really eye-catching. And they printed it on this kind of I don't know what the kind of the paper was, but it came out looking really dull. And I remember Brevoort and I were like really disappointed with the paper that it was printed on, because it dulled everything down, and we were not happy about that. There was a STARLORD trade paperback that came out, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, that collected. I can't remember if our limited series is in there. I'll have to check. But that's the kind of paper that we would have liked. The limited series. It was the 3-issue limited series. That's the kind of paper that we were expecting this project to be printed on. And it was really the last minute where we found out that it was going to be printed on this paper that was going to dull all the artwork.
So I have a question about that. So, you're saying that, when you're speaking to the artist, and the artist is like, "Hey, can you get Wolverine here?" Which, again, a way to juice sales. I love that. Love where his mind's at, right?
Yeah.
So, as someone who's working on this project, obviously you wanted to succeed, but also you are working within the realities of the marketplace at the time, which are obviously, we're kind of crumbling and falling apart, and the wheels are starting to come off in certain places. Did you ever give it any serious thought to let's switch him into the 616 if it meant more commercial viability, or were you like, no, this is the story we want to tell, and also Zahn's already done something that's very insular?
Right. The latter. Everything that you just said, the second part. We never gave. And again, I don't want to remove Brevoort from the creative process because he was technically the editor. I was credited as associate editor, so technically he was the editor. But this was a project that I generated. This was a project that I oversaw directly. I put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into it, and this was. I mean, Brevoort was great at that. Brevoort was really good at giving me chances to shine, because how else am I going to grow in my role? How else am I going to be groomed as an editor, which was obviously the goal of every assistant or associate editor, is to become a full editor. And if you have a really good boss who's nurturing, they give you these opportunities. So STARLORD was one of those opportunities. Spider-Man Hobgoblin Lives was another. So with STARLORD, I had no interest, and I never gave any thought to moving him into the 616, which I hate referring to it as that, but for the purposes of this conversation, I will. No, because we, as far as we were concerned, we were picking up on the original STARLORD. That STARLORD did not exist in the Marvel Universe, and I felt there was plenty of room to do projects set outside the Marvel Universe. And I think a lot of it also was that Zahn had delivered something that was so singular and so insular. I wasn't going to go back and say, "Hey, could you work Wolverine into this somehow?" The story didn't take place on Earth. That was another key thing. The story took place completely on different worlds, nowhere near Earth. It didn't involve Earth. There was no reason to bring any Marvel characters into this. So no, there was no serious consideration about it. And by the way, I just looked online, yes, the Timothy Zahn limited series is included in the STARLORD trade paperback that was put out a few years ago. I think it was called STARLORD Guardian of the Galaxy. I think that was the name of the trade paperback, and it collected everything up till the last thing was the limited series, because that was the original non-Marvel Universe take on STARLORD. So they collected all those stories in a trade paperback.
I will say I ended up reading it digitally, and I feel like I got a better experience, obviously, compared to the original single issues, because the colors are so vibrant and they really pop. On the digital way.
Yeah, the trade paperback published it on much better paper. Reading it digitally, you did get a better experience. I do recommend, if you do want a collection of all the original STARLORD stories, that trade paperback is pretty damn great. I actually bought a copy and read it from start to finish, even though I have all the original STARLORD stories. But reading them in one self-contained unit was great. It was a lot of fun, and it has a nice endpoint. I mean, the Timothy Zahn story is a really nice farewell to the original STARLORD universe, so to speak. I wish we had done more. I know Tim wanted to do more. I would have liked to have brought back Peter Quill, the original version of Peter Quill, but I don't recall how well the limited series sold. I'm assuming not well, because nothing was selling well at that point. That's how bad the industry was doing at the time. So there really was no call for STARLORD. And, they didn't bring STARLORD back until years later. And it was part of Guardians of the Galaxy. It was within the context of Guardians of the Galaxy. I think it was when Abnett and Lanning were writing it.
That's right.
So they didn't even bring STARLORD back in his own title. As the lead character, they brought him back within the context of another series, which was a smart way to do it. I can only imagine that when we did the STARLORD limited series, because I don't remember there being any real promotion for it, no advertising or anything like that. People probably saw it on the stands and were like, "What the hell is this? Who is STARLORD? What is STARLORD?" A whole generation or two of comic book fans had come and gone since the last time he appeared. So they probably didn't know what to make of it.
It's interesting because, at the time, I don't remember seeing it on the stands per se, but you'd think with Zahn's name, maybe if it had been a little bit bigger, I don't know, something about it. Because, you're right, Zahn was super hot at the time. And again, if you were following, Star Wars, that's where you got your Star Wars fix, was his books. And they really brought that life back, or that world back to life. So, it's too bad that there wasn't more of this, because I did like the character. I did like the interplay with him and the ship, and there's a lot of really cool, kind of fun stuff to enjoy there. And the art is incredible. It's interesting, I think we all kind of think of, well, not all of us, but sometimes when you think of Painted Comics, you go to Alex Ross first as a reference point, which is not necessarily fair. But this is so so expressive and so more vibrant and full of life. At times, Alex Ross is almost too lifelike, whereas this felt fantastical, and again felt a better marriage with Timothy Zahn's work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what Alex does is he brings a reality to the fantastic, but it still seems believable. I think that I can't recall if Alex has ever done a flat out, just straight science fiction story set in, where there's no connection to Earth. I mean, I'm probably wrong, but nothing is coming to mind. Whereas, I look at something like, say, Kingdom Come, and I think that Warner Brothers and James Gunn would be insane to not even consider just doing Kingdom Come just frame for frame, just minute per minute. Just shoot the damn graphic novel. Just shoot Kingdom Come as it. That's how lifelike it is. But you totally buy into it. That's how I see Alex's stuff. I mean, Kingdom Come. If they ever wanted to do a movie adaptation, if they changed the slightest thing, it would ruin the whole thing for me. Because that's how perfect I think Kingdom Come is. Just if it's that good. With Dan, I just remember Dan. It was so fantastical because it's such a science fiction story, and it really leans more towards not even the original Star Wars movies, more like the prequels and the sequels, because they had the bigger budget. They can do so much CGI. You can create these alien landscapes and do all this fantastical stuff. So it's really, I wouldn't say it's apples and oranges, because I think Dan did have a very realistic, grounded kind of style, but he was called upon to do different stuff than Alex usually does.
Mm-hmm. When I look at it, I think one of the things that really struck me, I loved his color work, first of all. I think, there's a lot of what really made it that fantastical and made it pop more. That is something with Alex's work. Again, it's because it's supposed to be more realistic. It doesn't go that extra direction in terms of color. So I did think the color did a lot of the work of really, again, making it even more fantastical, if possible.
I can see that. But yeah, I mean, I loved what Dan did. I love what Alex does. When he does a cover for a comic book these days, the interior art has to be really, really bad for me to not buy it, because I'll buy it just because of Alex's covers. I mean, that's he's just. I just think the world of his work. He's fantastic.
Absolutely. So we're gonna jump ahead of a couple of years now, and we're gonna talk about Moon Knight. So this is the Doug Monk and Mark Teixeira. So there had been, I believe, a Moon Knight miniseries a year or two earlier than this, and so then this book hits. So I'm really curious, like, what was it about bringing Doug back to his character? Was that a big part of it for you? Was to try and kind of reunite Moon Knight with his creator? Like, what was it about bringing him onto this book?
Well, let me give you a little bit of history first, because I'm not the one who initially brought Doug Mensch back to Moon Knight. It was a friend and a colleague, and he's still a dear friend of mine. But let me give you a little bit of context, because Moon Knight has been a character that has had a very, very tough time maintaining his own series. The original series by Doug Mensch and Bill Sienkiewicz lasted about 36 or 38 issues, and Doug didn't even see it through to the end because he left Marvel in a dispute with the editor-in-chief at the time, Jim Shooter. And Sienkiewicz left after a certain point, and I think Doug only lasted like maybe 3 or 4 issues after Sienkiewicz left. And so they brought in a new writer, Alan Zelenitz, I think, who finished the original series. Mm-hmm. And then they launched a second series called Fist of Khonshu, Moon Knight, which Alan Zelenitz started, and it was announced as an ongoing monthly. It only lasted 6 issues, and Alan didn't even stay for the whole 6 issues. And there was this round robin of artists. It was like a hot potato. It could not maintain a regular art. So that done after 6 issues. And then Moon Knight was pretty much, he couldn't get his own series again for years until, I couldn't tell you the year, but it was like probably around 1989, 1990. Mm-hmm. So they launched a new book, Mark Spector Moon Knight by Chuck Dixon and Sal Velluto. And they gave it their best shot. If anybody was going to make a go of that series, it was those two. And my feeling is if Doug Mensch isn't writing Moon Knight, Chuck Dixon is the guy to do it, because Chuck Dixon, it was a great series. I mean, I was reading it religiously. I mean, it was, there were some things that they did that deviated from the original concept that I didn't like, but for the most part, it felt at least like, a successor, an organic spiritual successor to what the original series was. And then Chuck left after a certain point, and the book just kind of spiraled slowly. It was a slow death spiral. Whoever was coming on afterwards they were not able to recapture whatever it was that made that character popular in the first place. And so they killed him off at the end. They just, just like, we don't know what to do with this character anymore. We're just going to kill off Mark Spector, Nobody who was a Moon Knight fan was happy, and nobody was like, we had so many people who worked at Marvel who were like Moon Knight fans and wanted to write that character. And for whatever reason, they never got a chance. You know, I don't want to name names. I don't want to speak out of school, and I don't know if they want me to, naming their names or all that. But there are a lot of people say, we got to get back to the original concept, and that's what worked. And I agree. Anyway, at one point, a fellow associate editor at Marvel, this is the guy I was talking about earlier, was a dear friend of mine, Mark Bernardo, also major Moon Knight fan, major Doug Mensch fan, and he was in a position where he could put together a project and basically say, look, I want to do this project. I want to get this guy to write. I want to get this guy to draw. And Marvel did what's called a P&L, which is a profit and loss statement, which is we estimate this will sell this much. We estimate it'll cost us this much to produce. Okay, fine. The numbers add up. Let's do this project. He was the one who brought back Doug Mensch. He invited him to come back. And knowing Doug, Doug's first question was probably, do I have to pay attention to anything that came after the last time I wrote Moon Knight? so the answer was yes. So he had to account for the fact that the last time we saw Mark Spector, Moon Knight, he was killed off. So Doug came up with a way to resurrect Moon Knight and at least acknowledge what had come before, but get past it really, really quick. And if you remember the original Moon Knight had 4 identities. Okay, he wasn't a split personality. He wasn't schizophrenic. He wasn't had multiple personality disorder or dissociative disorder or anything like that. He had 4 identities to fight crime. Okay, and there was his original identity, the mercenary Mark Spector, and he hated that identity because he hated the man he had become as Mark Spector. And so he took the money that he made as a mercenary, the fortune that he accrued as a mercenary, and he adopted a new identity, Stephen Grant. And he kept the Stephen Grant identity because that's the identity that his lover, Marlene, liked the most. She didn't like Mark Spector. Mark Spector was there on the scene when her father got killed. So she has an aversion to Mark Spector. So out of love for Marlene, he usually just maintained the Stephen Grant identity. Billionaire philanthropist Stephen Grant. Very sort of Bruce Wayne-ish, but not. And then there was, of course, Moon Knight, the masked crime fighter. And then there was Jake Lockley, the cab driver, who would drive his cab through the seediest parts of town. That was his way of sort of like making connections into the criminal underworld and knowing what was going on in New York City so that he can then fight that crime as Moon Knight. Okay, so 4 identities. Once Doug left the character, the first thing Marvel did was get rid of all the other identities except for Mark Spector and Moon Knight. Mark Spector because he's cool, he's a mercenary, so he's this mercenary, but he's also this costume crime fighter. Well, that to me betrays the character because he distanced himself from Mark Spector. He doesn't want to be Mark Spector. He doesn't like the man that Mark Spector was. That's why he's Stephen Grant. Maybe they felt it was too much like Batman. It's very possible they felt it was too much like Batman. So they got rid of the Stephen Grant identity. Anyway, so the first thing Doug does when he resurrects Moon Knight, he restores all the 4 identities. To me, it felt like a homecoming because I read those issues when it was coming out. It was a miniseries called Moon Knight Resurrection War, and it was written by Doug and illustrated by I think Tommy Lee Edwards.
Yes,
and it was a 4-issue limited series. And to me, it was like I said, it was a homecoming. It really felt like okay, we're getting this character back on track very quickly. Because Doug, it was very fast-paced. It was like boom, 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 boom. He's back. He's reunited with Marlene. He's reunited with his associate Frenchie, who's not like Alfred the Butler. He's much more than Alfred the Butler character. He's his partner. He's his pilot. He's all they have this long history together. So anyway, Doug, I think by the end of the first issue, almost everything was restored. The original status quo was restored. It was great. So what happened was a few months go by. I really liked what they had done, and I was editing a series called Journey into Mystery. I was like co-editing it with the guy I shared my office with at the time, a really sweet guy named Joe Andriani. And so the way it was set up was Journey into Mystery was set up as an anthology series now. That's actually the book where Thor originated from. And so we resurrected the title. And so Joe Andriani was going to edit a storyline, and then he'd hand the book over to me, and then I'd edit a storyline, and then I'd hand it back to him, and he would edit a storyline. So I don't remember the stories that Joe edited, but my first thing was, I think, a two-parter starring Hannibal King from The Tomb of Dracula. Vampire detective, okay? So he's a vampire, but he doesn't prey on humans. He does drink blood, but he gets it from blood banks. He does not attack humans. So he's still a good guy. But he's a private detective. So I brought back the original creator, Marv Wolfman, to do this Hannibal King storyline. The next thing I wanted to do was Moon Knight. I wanted Doug to write it, and my idea was I knew I wasn't going to get Bill Sienkiewicz. Bill Sienkiewicz was completely out of reach to me at that point. He was too big, doing too many things, too much in demand. But I thought Mark Texeira. I worked with Mark several times on his most recently on a graphic novel called Spider-Man: Legacy of Evil, which involved the Green Goblin and all that stuff. So I knew Mark. I'd worked with Mark. I loved Mark. Mark seemed to really enjoy working with me. So that was the concept that I had, was the next 4-part storyline that I had in Journey into Mystery would feature Moon Knight. And the other thing was, I thought it would be good for Moon Knight because he doesn't have to carry his own title. You know, the series wouldn't have to rise or fall based on Moon Knight's name. And I also felt it could give Journey into Mystery a boost because now we've got this cult favorite character appearing in Journey into Mystery, done by like what I thought was like an A-list team. Okay, so we started working on it. Doug said yes. I said, Doug, do whatever you want to do. You know, really. I mean, you're the creator. You. And Mark loved Moon Knight, and Mark loved Doug Mench's writing, so he was really excited about it. The only problem was he was also committed to launching the Black Panther with Christopher Priest for Marvel Knights. So we had to work out a way that he could do both. I don't remember exactly how we worked it out, but I just remember, you know, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. A lot of really fighting the clock because Mark told me he didn't really want to do Black Panther. He really wanted to do Moon Knight, but he was committed to Black Panther for a variety of reasons, and so he couldn't really get out of it. But Moon Knight was where his heart was. So okay, so what happened was someone on a higher level than me made the decision to spin Moon Knight out of Journey into Mystery and make it its own limited series. And so I was like, okay, if you guys feel that this will sell on its own name, who am I to say no? At one point, our editor-in-chief wanted to sneak it into the Marvel Knights imprint as to sort of jump onto that momentum, because that was the books that Joe Quesada and Jimmy Palmiotti were putting out. The Punisher, the Black Panther, Daredevil, and one other book, which
Inhumans.
I can't remember. The Inhumans, right. And then Joe and Jimmy and I got wind of it. And the three of us met, and I was like, Joe and Jimmy were like, we don't want this in Marvel Knights. And I said, I don't want it in Marvel Knights. It's like, I don't work with you, and I don't work for you, and it doesn't fit into Marvel Knights. And, it's, so they pushed, they had the clout to push back. I didn't. And so it came out as its own thing. Unfortunately, it came out after I'd left Marvel. All the legwork, all the paperwork, all the work had been done on that series before I left. All the guy who inherited the project from me, all he had to do was just bring it down to the manufacturing department and send them out for shipping, to get printed. And he couldn't even do that right. He screwed up. He added cover copy to each of the 4 covers. I envisioned the magazine to not have any cover copy, other than maybe he's back, or just something really sort of minimal. And this guy, the guy who basically took the project off my hands when I left it to ship them out, he added the name of the storyline on each of the covers, and he got the name of the storyline wrong.
Yeah.
So the name of the storyline is High Strangeness. Okay, High Strangeness. It's on the front. It's on the first page of every single issue. Okay, it's right there on the front page. On the covers, he added High Strangers.
Yeah.
And so to this day, people still refer to it as High Strangers, and I just have to just sort of hang my head. It's just like, oh my God, he had one job to do, and he couldn't even do that. That's the way Marvel was at the time. I don't know if it's gotten any better, but it was it's on the first page of every story. All you have to do is check the first page. It's right there, and nobody did. So that's kind of that's the one sort of stain on that book, as far as I'm concerned, is, it just. But other than that, I had a great time working with Doug. Doug and I, we really clicked. I felt it was my job as editor to just make sure that this was going to be fun for the old style, the old guard Moon Knight fans, but also welcoming to new fans. So whenever I felt it was a little too insular, a little too inside, I would call Doug and talk to him and say, look, this is a little, I think new readers are going to be this is going to go over their heads. Can we sort of clarify a little bit? And Doug groused, as I would expect him to. But he was willing to work with me, and I always appreciated that. I never stepped in. I never tried to override him. I never tried to run roughshod over him. I never tried to use my position as editor over him, kind of thing. It was more like, Doug, I love this project as much as you do. I'm just trying to think of having a chance of, really getting a broader audience excited. So, this is reading is a little too obscure to me. Can we clarify a little bit? And, again, he was reluctant, but eventually he gave in. It didn't hurt the book, and it made me happy. So, maybe that's how he looked at it. But I loved working with him, and we stayed in touch even after I left Marvel. We've stayed in touch over the years.
I do want to mention, you were talking about Mark, and that this was a project that he really wanted to work on, and you can feel that on every page. You can see it's some of his best work because he cares. He cares. Not that he wasn't caring about other things, but you know what I mean? There's certain projects kind of click with you in a certain way. And again, I would imagine getting the opportunity to work on Moon Knight with Doug would have been, a really special experience. And it really comes off in the artwork.
It absolutely does. And he was so excited. He loved the stuff that Mensch had done on the original Moon Knight series, and he loved the work of Bill Sienkiewicz. Who doesn't? Who didn't? And he felt, I think, to a certain extent, Mark felt honored to be following in Bill Sienkiewicz's footsteps. And I told him, I said, I see you as a successor to Bill Sienkiewicz. And his eyes kind of widened, and his head got thrown back. He was like, what? I was like, yeah, I see you as a successor to Bill Sienkiewicz more than any of the other people who followed him on Moon Knight. And so, I really, and he followed Doug's script. Doug wrote it a very specific and a very visual way. Doug can be a very visual writer. And Mark just picked up on it and really delivered. I think the only thing we had to deal with Mark's artwork is there was one point where he did a back shot of Marlene, I think in the bedroom, and her let's just say her more private outfits that she wore under her regular clothes was probably a little too risque. So we had to add some material to her undergarments. Let's put it that way, because we were afraid that we would get shut down by the Comics Code Authority. You know. Mm-hmm. But other than that, his artwork just went through without a hitch. He did a fantastic job. And Steve Oliff, the colorist, was a guy his coloring I fell in love with when I was a kid, and he was coloring the Hulk magazine, and when it was a full color magazine, he was doing like the most innovative stuff of that time period. Just beautiful photorealistic coloring, just gorgeous. And so he was state of the art, and so it was really exciting for me to get to work with Steve Oliff. He was doing the coloring at the time, and so that's another reason why Marvel Knights didn't want, my Moon Knight series, aside from the other stuff that I mentioned before, was they had a house like an in-house style. They had a very specific type of coloring that they were using at the time. I think it was a guy named Brian Haberlin, and they wouldn't have gone with a Steve Oliff. That was not the style that they were going for. So it's kind of like, it's like I neither side wanted it in Marvel Knights, so we were able to keep it out of there. And by the time the book came out, I was off staff from Marvel, so I don't know how it sold. I just know that I liked it, and to this day, it remains Doug Moench's last statement on Moon Knight. I got to edit the last Moon Knight story by his original creator for the time being, unless they call him up and give him another Moon Knight assignment tomorrow or in the near future. I'll have edited the last Doug Moench Moon Knight story.
So, as someone who is a fan of Moon Knight and also has worked with Doug on Moon Knight, how do you feel about all the different interpretations we've gotten since? Because as you mentioned before, the original idea was not that he had any kind of disorder or that there was any kind of bleed between identities. Like, they've really leaned in hard on that. And I have to admit, I think that was my first kind of really knowing who Moon Knight was. Actually, it was probably I think there was a Marvel Knights team-up book that he was part of at some point. But then a couple of years later, we have David Finch comes on and really changed. I think Houston was writing at the time, and that's when Moon Knight really changes into what we more understand him to be now, which is so different. And so when I read this book in advance of our discussion, I really liked not having to deal with that stuff and have it just be like he this is all his tools of the trade. That's what the identities were for, and not that it was this other thing. And at times I think maybe it's, people have leaned into it so heavily over the years that not having to deal with that and just having a more straightforward, really fun adventure story that was still had some darkness to it, I actually really like that more. So I'm curious how you have felt about how Moon Knight has shifted and changed, because obviously anyone who's watched the Disney Plus series, which would be yes, but a wider audience would probably have seen that than read a lot of the comics too, right? So that's what they're going to think of when they think of Moon Knight. So how do you feel about that as a fan and as someone who's worked on him professionally?
Can I curse on this show?
Absolutely.
I'm being facetious. Number one, I only read a few of the Moon Knight projects that followed mine. I read the Charlie Houston series, and I read the even after he left, I think a guy named Mike Benson took over after him as the writer, and I read that series through to the end. And then I read the Brian Michael Bendis version. It was, I think, a 12-issue limited series, or maybe it was supposed to be an ongoing and only has a 12-issue, but Bendis wrote one too. I think that's the last Moon Knight series that I read. Okay. But I kept an eye on what's been going on with the character since. I'm not buying the series anymore, I haven't bought a Moon Knight series since volume uppity. I don't know what volume they're up to now, and I don't know what's the last volume that I think it was when Jed McKay started.
Okay.
His first run. I think that might have been. But anyway, long story short, I felt like the Charlie Houston one was gripping. It was very interesting. I thought the artwork by Finch was gorgeous. But again, I felt like they're missing the point. They don't get it. He's not crazy. And I know that Doug feels the same way because I spoke to Doug about it. And, Doug has gone on record as saying he's not crazy. He's maybe borderline crazy. He maybe could become crazy, but I don't write him as crazy. And those multiple identities are tools, like you said. They're not. When he's Jake Lockley, he thinks he's Jake Lockley. He's always aware of who he is.
Mm-hmm.
Jake Lockley is a tool. Mark Spector, if he ever has to take the Mark Spector identity on again, he's fully aware of what he's doing. It's the same way when Batman takes on the Matches Malone identity.
Mm-hmm.
No different. So I didn't like the fact that Moon Knight killed Bushman. I didn't like that. I didn't like that he was crazy. I didn't like that Frenchie lost his legs. I don't even think Frenchie is alive anymore. I think they killed off Frenchie at this point. I don't like that they kept on breaking up him and Marlene. Him and Marlene, they are tight. They are each other's soulmate. And I hate that the first thing that they did after Doug left was they broke up him and Marlene. The first thing Doug did when he came back was reunite, Moon Knight and Marlene. They should be together. They are Clark and Lois. They are Peter and Mary Jane. And the fact that there was so much conflict thrown into that relationship is like, oh, you don't get this. You don't get this series. You don't get this character. And it's only gotten worse since then. I don't know anything about the Moon Knight in the three-piece suit. Mr. Knight, I think they call him.
Yep.
And he wears a white suit and a tie. I'm like, what is this? I know nothing about it because I haven't read any of it. The fact that that's the version that the TV show picked up on explains a lot. I mean, that TV show I thought was awful regardless, but that TV show gave me nothing of what I would have wanted to see in a Moon Knight TV show. What I would have liked to have seen in a Moon Knight TV show is, and I recommend you do this, get your hands on, they collected them in a Marvel Premiere hardcover a bunch of years ago. Go on eBay, go on the secondary market. It was called Moon Knight Countdown to Dark. Okay? Or if you're willing to spend a little bit more, I don't know how much that hardcover book is now. Like I said, it was one of those Marvel Premiere thin hardcover books. It may be cheaper at this point to just get the Epic collection. Because I think all of those stories would probably be in the first Epic collection of Moon Knight. It's all of the stories that were published in the Hulk magazine, which is where Moon Knight really sort of gained his cult following. It was a backup series in the Hulk magazine. That's where Mensch and Sienkiewicz first got together. And one of the all-time greatest Moon Knight storylines is from that run from the Hulk magazine, which is where Mark Spector Moon Knight has to deal with a hatchet murderer, a serial killer who's stalking New York City and killing women. Okay? Moon Knight goes after him and realizes that he's somebody from Mark Spector's past. I don't want to spoil it. For anybody who actually is going to seek these stories out. It's basically a 3-part story. It's two main parts with an epilogue, and it is great. And it's these stories that convinced Marvel this is a character who's worthy of his own comic book series, and it's just great. And Doug and Sienkiewicz also did an issue of the black and white magazine Marvel Premiere, and they gave Moon Knight a solo story in black and white. It has since been colored. I believe probably in the Marvel premiere story, I'm pretty sure it was colored. I don't know if they colored it in the Epic. It works either way. It works colored. It works black and white. But those are the stories that, to me, that is quintessential Moon Knight. And I was, when they first announced they were doing a television series, and I saw the teaser for the television series, I thought that's what it was going to be. And the fact that they leaned into the split personality and the Mr. Knight, and he's this and he's that and he's that, and we never got anything of Moon Knight fighting crime in New York City.
No.
It never even got there. It got to the point where I'm watching two kaiju fighting in the desert, two giant gods fighting in Egypt. I'm like, what the hell is this? So, I to put it mildly, I really effing hate where Moon Knight is as a character now. But I know that I'm at the risk of sounding like, hey, you youngins, get off my lawn.
Well, it's interesting because when I really look at it, like, and a lot of what they've done with the character is so divorced from what he was that it's almost just a different character anyway. Like, which I guess makes it worse. Like, it could have just been something new in some way. Someone new with Khonshu that's not actually Moon Knight, but like still goes in the similar direction. It could have been something else.
Yeah, the big problem is that nobody who's got a brain in their head is going to work for Marvel or DC or and create a new character and just basically give it to the company. There's no incentive for anybody to come up with an original character now and give it to Marvel or DC. They keep it for themselves. So it boils down to taking established properties and basically doing one of those in-name only things, and you see that. I mean, that's what that TV series was. It was Moon Knight in name only for me. And I don't like that. For the first 10 years or so of the MCU, they were doing fairly faithful adaptations of these characters. And it got to the point where I feel like, I think with Moon Knight and with Shang-Chi, I was so excited when they went out that they were going to be doing a Master of Kung Fu, movie. I thought, oh my God, that's going to be great, and again, it was in name only. It had nothing to do with that Master of Kung Fu series. It was why am I seeing people riding around on dragons? I mean, why are people entering different dimensions? And they turned it into what was that? The Fighting Tiger, Hidden Dragon? I'm probably getting the name wrong, but that's what it felt like. And like, no, Shang-Chi is James Bond. Working for, as a spy. He's like, he's like, it's you're crossing Bruce Lee with James Bond. Yeah. That's Shang-Chi.
Absolutely.
And that's not what they did. So, I'm not in favor of that. Look, I don't have a vested interest in it anymore. But I really was excited for Moon Knight, and I was really, really just completely disappointed, to say the least.
Yeah.
And Marvel, I don't pay any attention to Moon Knight as a comic book anymore, just because I know I'm not going to get the version that I want and expect. And until they make a point of saying the original is back, the original concept, and we've gone back to the roots. I'm just not interested. So these books may be very well written. For all I know, they're very well written and they're drawn very nicely. I'm not even looking at them just because I don't see the point. Again, really nothing against Jed McKay. He may be a very good writer for all I know, and he may be doing work that's really resonating with readers. So I can't say, on a fundamental level, I'm not in favor of it. I
mean, I appreciate that kind of stance because you're not saying anything about the quality of the book. You're just like, this is an interpretation that I don't want, that this is not the character I would like to read about, and therefore I will read my epics. I'll read my old issues, and that's the Moon Knight I'm going to enjoy.
Yeah. It's the same way. It's like, I haven't read, I'm trying to get back, I'm trying to catch up at least a little bit on my comic book reading. And there's a run on Spider-Man that I've kept my mouth completely shut about. I didn't weigh in yay or nay, only because I haven't read it. I hadn't read it, and I'm reading it now, and I find it to be, to put it mildly again, I find it to be completely wrongheaded, just on practically every level. And but I can say that now because I'm actually reading it. You know, I won't say who. I've been pretty vocal of the fact that I didn't think there would ever be a run of Spider-Man that I hated as much as J. Michael Straczynski's. This one is a contender. This one is like in the running. It's right up there with that. But I can say that because I read it. I haven't read any of the Moon Knight stuff since Bendis. I've picked up a bunch. Immediately following the Bendis run, but I haven't read them. So I'm not sure who. I think if it was Jed MacKay who wrote those issues, I have them. I haven't read them yet. But there was a point. I think my cutoff point was they announced that they were killing off Mark Spector again, and I was like, I'm done. It's just if that's all they can come up with to kill him yet again, this will be like the third or fourth time. I'm out. And so again, it may be great stuff. It may be really well written. It may be clicking with readers. They love it. Marvel may be happy with it. I will not comment on it just because I haven't read it. But I know it's not the Moon Knight that I want to read.
So it's
just very quickly. It's one of those characters where I really feel the original creator is the guy who did it best, or woman. And if it's not that creator working on it, I feel the same way about Howard the Duck. I wouldn't read Howard the Duck unless Steve Gerber was writing it. And so that's Moon Knight falls into that category for me.
So we're going to jump to Incredible Hulk versus Superman, Double Lives. So this is, I guess, around that same period, or maybe just before you're on Moon Knight. So you're doing this crossover. Now, I've talked with Tom in the past about, in general, what the kind of feeling was on crossovers at the time, that because there were so many, it was kind of like, oh, this is just the next one. Like, there was almost, at least in the offices, they started to feel a little less, maybe special and exciting because there were so many being pumped out very quickly. So I'm curious how your feeling of working on the project was, because obviously you're a big Hulk fan. You'd already worked with Roger before. So I'm curious what you kind of brought to the table and what you were excited about being able to explore with doing a crossover like this.
Which Tom were you referring to?
I was talking to Brevoort.
Okay. Here's what I will tell you is, there were a lot of crossovers going on. Hulk versus, Superman versus the Incredible Hulk was special. I'll tell you how I knew it was special. Whenever pages came in from Steve Rude, the editor-in-chief made it a point of coming to my office to look at the pages. Okay? I'll tell you another thing. The pages started to come in. The first few pages were coming in from Steve Rude. I got a call from the editor over at Wizard Magazine. Okay? Nobody was supposed to know that this project was happening. All right, this was a top secret. The only people who knew were a select few at Marvel, a select few at DC. The one person I know for sure at DC knew about this was Joey Cavallari, who was editor of Superman at the time. He was my counterpart at DC, so he and I were coordinating all the time. So I know Joey wasn't, blabbing to outside people about it. I know I wasn't. Somehow it got leaked to Wizard, okay? And again, we were not acknowledging that this project existed. So this guy from Wizard calls me up. I've never spoken to this guy. I've never seen this guy. I've never met this guy. Okay, complete stranger. I pick up the phone, and he's like, "Hey, Glenn, old buddy, old pal, this is blah, 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 blah from Wizard." And that immediately put me off. Mm-hmm. It's like, I don't like that kind of, phony BS. So I'm already on my guard. He goes, "Hey, yeah, here, you're editing this crossover Hulk Superman with Steve." He goes, "Love to see those pages. Love to run them in Wizard if you're willing." And I said, "Well, also keep in mind, I had no use for Wizard. I thought it was a rag. Okay, I didn't like the attitude there. I didn't like the way that the attitude towards Marvel. It was very anti-Marvel unless they needed something from Marvel. So I was like, I'm not gonna help them. So I'd already made up my mind. Actually, what I said was, I have no idea what you're talking about. I said, there's no such project on our schedule or anything like that. I just basically said, I said it without completely lying to him. I don't like to lie. So I said, basically something along the lines of, there's no project on our schedule with that title. Which was absolutely true, because I told Marvel, do not put this on the schedule until Steve Rude is done. Mm-hmm. Okay, do not try to fence him in on a schedule, because he's not going to meet it. He has to work at his own pace. Do not schedule this project until he's done. So what I told to the Wizard guy was absolutely true. No such project was on the schedule. Okay. So immediately after I got off the phone with this guy, I called Joey at DC, and I said, "Listen, you might be getting a call from this guy from Wizard. I don't want to give them anything. Do you agree?" And Joey was like, "Yeah." He goes, "Let's not." Now, okay, so I knew that Joey would have my back, and he wouldn't basically undermine me on that. Mm-hmm. So there was. Let me put it to you this way: not to discount what Tom was saying, but what I will tell you is, the editor-in-chief at the time showed very little enthusiasm about anything that was going on at Marvel. He made it a point to come to my office whenever new Steve Rude pages came in to look at them. Okay, so that's one thing. And the other thing is the fact that Wizard was sniffing around. Mm-hmm. The minute stuff started coming in. So I think there was interest. I think there was a lot of interest in Steve Rude doing Superman and the Hulk. I think there was a lot of interest in Roger Stern writing Superman and the Hulk together.
Absolutely.
It was special. Yeah.
So I have a couple questions about this. So again, to go back to something I talked about with Brevoort in the past. So he had said that one of the challenges at times with a lot of these crossovers in this period is that on the one hand, you want to kind of have it be a little bit more evergreen so that people can pick it up. But at the same time, they wanted people to read the books, like the current books as well. So it had to kind of, in some way, reflect current continuity while also trying to stand, aside from that so you can kind of read it evergreen. So your book, the Hulk and Superman definitely is able to kind of weather that edge, because you have a framing device that's current, and you make reference to things like the fact that Betty's dead. But at the same time, you do a throwback story, which is so perfect for Steve Rude in terms of his interpretation. So how quickly did that kind of idea kind of coalesce in terms of having a framing device and doing a story that would be so perfect in the kind of the early days of both heroes that would fit Steve?
Okay. The idea of setting it in the past was from the start, before Roger was even on it. Okay? Mm-hmm. That idea originated with me, and I think I was discussing it with Brevoort. It might have come up in a conversation between me and Brevoort. Brevoort, I was still working with Brevoort when this project started to come together. Okay, and so I'm the one who kind of took the ball and ran with it, but it might have come from a conversation that I had with Brevoort. So that was the starting point, and that's the pitch that I gave to Stan Lee when Stan Lee was going to write this book. Stan was the original writer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That's probably what got the project an instant green light from DC. Stan was going to write it. And I remember talking the kernel of the story out with Stan. By that point, I was no longer working with Brevoort. I was my own editor, and or I was an editor on my own. And I just remember like sitting back and having my feet up on my desk, and I'm in an hour and a half plotting session with Stan Lee. So think about that. But ultimately, Stan bowed out, and but Steve was already on. Steve had signed on to work with Stan. So when Stan bowed out, I figured Steve would bow out too. And Steve wanted to do it. Steve was hooked. Steve wanted to do this project. He would call me up and say, when are we doing this? When are we doing this? And I was like, well, I guess I better find another writer. So I was thinking, like, who has done a great job on both characters, and who would DC approve very easily? It was Roger. It had to be Roger. It just had to be. And so when Roger signed on, I said, look, this is the only kernel I'm going to give you of a story, okay? Let's set it in the past, where you've got the Hulk in his early days when he still had his secret identity, and you've got Superman in his early days too. But it's the Byrne Superman. It's the weaker Superman. It's not the Silver Age Superman that can, shatter planets by blinking hard. It's still going to be the John Byrne weaker Superman from Man of Steel. It's just Steve Rude is going to draw him the way Steve Rude draws Superman. And there was a precedent for that, because DC had done that remember that World's Finest miniseries that Steve Rude drew, that Dave Gibbons wrote, and it was early post-crisis. It was the first, real team-up adventure between Batman and Superman after Byrne remade Superman. And so you had a very Fleischer-esque Superman, and you had a very Bob Kane, Jerry Robinson style Batman, but it was post-crisis. So there was a precedent for it. Roger loved the idea, and it was Roger who came up with the framing device, the framing sequence, setting it in the present and then going back into the past. And the whole thing of Betty dying at that point, because that was when she was dead. She got better since then. But it was a perfect hook to latch onto in the beginning. That's why they're doing this retrospective about the Hulk on TV, and it's what triggers Clark and Lois to remember what it was like when they first encountered Bruce Banner and Betty, and how there's been nothing but tragedy following Bruce Banner throughout the entire period that he's been the Hulk. And so then it goes back into the past. So that was Roger. I mean, Roger wrote the script. Roger wrote the story. All I gave him was set it in the past. So you've got Primal Superman, Primal Hulk, and it lets Steve Rude do the Kirby Hulk. The weaker, more classic Silver Age Hulk that he wants to do. And so the only other thing I think the only other things that I discussed with Roger where I raised the point was number one, I said, because some of the crossovers at that point, I think all the other crossovers at that point, had that sort of device where you had to travel from the Marvel universe to get to the DC universe and vice versa. And I said to Roger, what are we going to do here? How are we going to do this? All the other books are using that device. What do we do now? And Roger was like, they both live on the same Earth. And I was like, yeah, they both live on the same Earth. That's how they used to do them. Remember, you read the originals. We're gonna ignore what everybody else is doing. We're just gonna set both characters on the same in the same universe as if they always had been. And fortunately, Joey and DC didn't have an objection to that. The only other thing I brought up to him was, I said, in all these other crossovers, there's the DC character has a villain show up, and the Marvel character has a villain show up. I said, we're setting this so early that the only Hulk villains that we could use at this point are, the Space Phantom, not the Space Phantom, the Space Phantom, the Toadmen, or Tyrannus, or Tyrannus, however you pronounce it. I said, And I said, so how are we going to do this? I said, are we going to use one of them? And Roger was like, nah, let's just use Luthor. I said, okay. I don't have a problem with that. And we turned in the script, and nobody at DC objected. And nobody at Marvel objected. That DC was kind of outweighing us in terms of, on the villain end, you know? Because we could make the case that, well, the Hulk is still kind of villainous in this story. He's still like a danger, so, you know, and we could kind of play with that. But nobody raised an objection. We didn't have to use, any characters from like the Avengers, because at that point, around that time, I think the Hulk might have been affiliated with the Avengers. I don't remember. It's been a while since I've read the story. But it's really set early in the Hulk's career, we didn't do any retcons where we took an established character and dropped him into this story, because that'll be his first encounter with the Hulk. And we didn't do anything like that. So we got away with it. And other than that, Roger just did what Roger does. He's one of the best. And Steve just drew it. And Al Milgrom, Al gets a bad rap, or has gotten a bad rap because he often got jobs at the last minute. We had to like ink a job overnight to get it out to press, because people know that Al could work fast, and they complain, "Oh, this looks like he got it, did it overnight." Yeah, because he did. But if you look at the stuff that Al did when he had a humane deadline, it's gorgeous. There's a reason why Jim Starlin wanted to work with Al all the time. He's a great inker. So I got Al Milgrom to ink it, and Al did and I made sure that Al had enough time to do the job well, and he did. And I think I remember, a lot of people saying, "Wow, great job by Milgrom," as if it's a surprise. No, when he has the time to do a great job, he does a great job.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
The book is tremendously charming, and again, it doesn't matter when you read it; like, it just kind of fits. It works because, again, you're talking about early days in their careers. I like that it's just Luthor, to be honest, because I do remember reading a lot of those crossovers, and yeah, there was always kind of perfunctory appearance, like you had to have equal screen time. Like it was awkward at times, because it was like, well, why is this going in this direction? Whereas it felt very natural that you had Luthor working with the military. Like, that feels very apropos.
And General Ross working with Luthor. So there you kind of do have another Hulk. Although Ross isn't really a Hulk villain. He's certainly a Hulk enemy, but not a villain.
No.
So we kind of covered that base with General Ross, even though Ross isn't quite a menace in that story, the way Luthor is. Some of these crossovers, it makes sense. It makes sense to team up Luthor and Dr. Octopus in the first Spider-Man one, Superman Spider-Man one. It didn't make any sense to me. Dr. Doom, who's not really a Spider-Man villain. I thought he worked well in the story, but it was weird that it was Dr. Doom and the Parasite in the second one.
Yeah.
And then in the next one after that, Batman versus the Hulk, where it was the Joker and the Shaper of Worlds, which was like that was a real stretch. I remember talking to Len Wein about it. I asked him, I said, "Why the Shaper of Worlds?" He said, "Because I like the Shaper of Worlds, and I didn't want to use the leader. I'm not a big fan of the leader." He goes, and the Abomination was like, he's too much of a bruiser. So it did. So he went with the Shaper of Worlds, and it was like, okay, all right, but it worked. That was the most important thing, is it worked. I will tell you, and I've told this story before, but and I alluded to it earlier, was when I was working with Stan on this. And, at one point, like I said, I've got my feet up on my desk and we're talking. And I'll tell you two anecdotes that were in the same conversation, I think. At least that's what how your memory blurs after a while. This might have been the same conversation, or it might have been two different ones. But when I was talking to Stan about it, and I said, let's set it in the early days of both their careers, okay? I said, so basically, Stan, it's back when you were still writing the Hulk, okay? It's the early days when you and Kirby were still doing the Hulk. And I said, and what's even more is it's the days when nobody knew that Bruce Banner was the Hulk. He still had the secret identity.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Stan gets all excited over the phone, and he's like, that's the way the Hulk worked the best, when nobody knew that he was Bruce Banner. Why the hell did they change that? Why did they make it so that everybody knows who he is? It ruined the whole dynamic. And I'm sitting there on the phone like, do I tell him that he's the one who did that story? Because that was well within his time frame when he was still the guy doing the Hulk. He was writing the Hulk at that point. So I was just like, I remember saying, yeah, I don't know, Stan. I don't know what they were thinking back then. Just move away from the subject. But anyway, it was an hour-long conversation, and we were wrapping it up. And I said, Stan, this has been such a pleasure. It's like having this conversation with you. It's such a thrill for me to be spending so much time with you. And he wrapped up the phone. He wrapped up the phone call with, "Great talking to you, Gary." So there you go. I didn't take it personally because Stan's memory was notoriously bad. Mm-hmm. So you couldn't take it personally. But it knocked the wind out of my sails a little bit, but I didn't take it personally. So that was what it was like working on that project. And that's another one that I wasn't at Marvel long enough to see it through to the very end, but all the pieces were in place. So I think Tom Brevoort really had to do was just, make sure the pages were in order and ship it out, because everything was in place by the time I left.
How detailed was Roger's plots? Given obviously he knows that Steve is going to be the one drawing it, so how much latitude did he kind of leave Steve to do his thing?
It was a tight plot. I mean, everything was there for Rude to draw. It was page by page. Roger broke down every page, described what was going on the pages. Mm-hmm. Where Steve took, I'll tell you another anecdote. Steve would draw like little things in the background, nothing that affected the flow of the plot, nothing that changed the story, nothing that Roger would have had to account for in the script. Okay, but what Steve would do was draw like little background stuff, and one of the things he drew was there's a point where the Hulk shows up at a picnic park, and he's on the rampage. He smells food, so he starts going over to where the barbecue is, and he lifts like an entire roast beef or whatever and starts eating it. And you have in the background people running for their lives, or like throwing over a table and hiding behind the table as it's been flipped over on its side. And at one point in one of the panels, he had the entire cast of King of the Hill hiding behind the table. So you had Hank Hill, Bobby Hill, and Peggy Hill. And I called Steve in a panic, and I said, Steve, we can't do this. Why not? I said, because we don't own the King of the Hill characters. And I said, DC is... I said, even if Marvel lets us run this through, DC will just completely have a shit fit. They will, because you have to bring the lawyers in and blah, 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 blah. I said, because I've dealt with DC, and when Marvel... on books that I've worked on, when DC felt like we were infringing on one of their characters, DC jumped on us like you wouldn't believe. I said, so I'm explaining all this to Steve. I said, even if Marvel is okay with throwing in the King of the Hill characters in the background, DC won't be. Well, I'll call DC. I said, no, you won't. You're not going to call DC. Well, why not? Because I said so. I said, DC doesn't have to deal with this, okay? I'm telling you how DC is going to respond. We don't... So I said, so no to him on that. So he said, well, you know what? I'm going to call Mike Judge. And Mike Judge will we'll talk to DC, and he will give them permission to use his... I said, no, you won't. I said, Steve, you're not going to do that. And he's like, well, why not? I said, Steve, like it or not, I'm your editor on this. You're working for me, okay? I said, I am telling you, I do not want you doing this. If anybody's going to call DC to get permission, if anybody is going to call Mike Judge to get permission, it's going to be me, and I'm not doing that. So he backed off. To his credit, he backed off. You know, I mean, Steve's the kind of guy where if he sees something, he wants it, he will do whatever it takes to get it. You know, and so I had to kind of like talk him down from that and say, look, there are different layers here that you need to understand. I got off the phone with him. I was cracking up. I wasn't mad or anything. I want to make that abundantly clear. I was cracking up because it was just like so. It was like, you know, trying to like pull the reins on a wild horse. You know, it was just like, you know, Steve. You know, it was a delight. You know, even at the time, it was a delight. It was one of those things that you hang up the phone, you shake your head, and you laugh. You know, but it all came out exactly, you know, the way it. This is a very long-winded answer to your question, which was, well, how detailed was Roger's plot? You should know by now I'm a very long-winded guy. I give very detailed answers. But yeah, that's what it was like.
Well, I can say it's a tremendous read. It's so much fun. It's funny seeing that scene now. I can see how the kid was supposed to be Bobby. The others are changed, but it's still very clearly Bobby. So I wouldn't have known that if you hadn't pointed it out, but it's very funny.
Well, I think enough time has gone by at this point that it's safe enough to, you know. I mean, the thing is there used to be so many little things like that in the Marvel and DC comics where Clark Kent and Lois Lane showed up during Walt Simonson's Thor, and all those little crossovers that they used to do hidden when in the early '70s when stories that would take place in Rutland, Vermont. Where the characters would dress up, the DC characters would dress up as Marvel characters, and the Marvel characters would dress up as DC characters, and all that kind of stuff, and all these stealth little crossovers with characters. There was an issue of, I believe there was an issue of the Legion of Superheroes where Mr. Spock was drawn in the background, you know. And I think that's what Steve was kind of like trying to channel, but the times were different at that point, you know. It was. Everything was so litigious and so you really had to cover your ass. So that was in the spirit of that, and I just, you know, and you've got DC, which was owned by Warner Brothers. You've got Marvel, which at the time was owned by the guy who owned Revlon. But we were, as I recall, we were still up in the air who was going to end up owning us, because you had two corporations fighting over us at the time, and then you had King of the Hill, which I think was owned by 20th Century Fox. It's like there's too many things that have to fall into place to just. And I felt like it was not worth the legwork. I just wanted to get the book done. So that was what was behind that. But I'm glad that you were at least able to pick up that, you know, you were able to look at it now and say, oh yeah, that would have been Bobby Hill. Absolutely. Because it would have been, yeah.
Any final thoughts on working on this book, which again it's people should go pick it up. It's interesting. It's obviously one of those things where it came out, people enjoyed it at the time, but because of Marvel and DC, it was never reprinted forever until just a couple of years ago when we finally got all the crossovers kind of put in a big omnibus, and now people can go back and read this book in a way that they really couldn't for over 20 years unless they were able to find the original singles. So what other final thoughts do you have so that people, to spur people to go check out this story in their omnibus?
Well, I was thrilled when they announced the omnibus because I was thrilled that it was going to be back in print. That's first of all. I actually found, and I have a few copies because I was the editor, so I got free copies from Marvel. But I was actually in a comic book shop in Florida a few years ago, and I found a copy in mint condition for like $5. So I bought an extra copy. And then I saw on eBay, it's been selling for like $20, $25, $30 upward. So I was kind of like, well, cool. I'm glad that people think that's, it's worth that much, I don't know if the price has gone down since the omnibus came out, but look, it's one of the projects that as an editor, I'm proudest to have worked on. It's one of those things where all the pieces fell into place, even though they had no right to, because like I said, Stan was supposed to do it. Stan bowed out. I had to find another writer, but I found the best writer. And once we were up and running, everything it was so smooth. It just worked. I got the writer that I wanted. I got the artist that wanted to be there. I got the inker I wanted. I got the colorist I wanted. I got the letterer that I wanted. We lettered it on the boards, old style. You know, Steve Rude and I both agreed we really wanted to do this book like a 1960s comic book, where the pencils come in, the script comes in, the original boards go off to the letterer. That's how we did it, you know. Jim Novak was the letterer, and he was happy to be lettering on the boards because he got so little opportunity to do it anymore at that point. It was all the computer lettering, and you know, so it all fell into place. My one regret is I was not the one to ship the book out for printing. Mm-hmm. I believe, you know, I knew it was in good hands once Brevoort took it over, and so in that regard, and Brevoort was my boss for several years. Brevoort was a mentor of mine. I had no problem sharing the editor credit with him, you know. But I mean, would it have been nice to have the whole credit to myself? Sure, but I wasn't there. And Brevoort finished up the project. He absolutely, you know, deserved you know, that editorial credit. I'm glad that he felt that I deserved it too, because it would have been completely within his rights, I think, because he was the editor sending it out. He would have been within his rights to take sole credit for it, but he kept my name on, and I will always be, you know, eternally grateful to him for that. I love it. I'm proud of it. I've stayed in touch, you know, with, you know, almost all the people involved in it. And it was, you know, it was one of the last things I worked on at Marvel, and it was, you know, a great way to go out.
Mm-hmm. Were you able to sweet talk Steve into getting an original page, though?
No. I never used my position as editor, you know, for that kind of thing. I'd always, you know, every page that I've worked on was either that I own the original artwork of, was either given to me as a gift or I bought. So I own an original page of Untold Tales of Spider-Man that was given to me as a gift. It was because I was the assistant editor of that book. And a ghostwriter. I don't know if we've ever talked about that.
I don't think so.
I was a ghostwriter. Yeah, I was a ghostwriter on. I was credited, but under a pseudonym. So there was a couple of issues, 2 or 3 issues that I wrote with Kurt under a pseudonym.
Oh wow!
So yeah, we'll talk about that some other time. But I own a page of that, but not an issue that I actually worked on. But I worked on every issue, obviously, because in an editorial capacity. So I own that, and I own 2 pages of the Dracula limited series that I wrote, and I bought them both. So those are the only pages of stuff that I physically worked on. I never wanted to use my position as an editor because it's awkward. You know, can you give me a free page? Can you get, because you know, Steve in particular could get hundreds of pages, hundreds of dollars for his pages. You know, so I never asked and he never offered. So no, so I would have loved to.
I actually have a page from one of the issues you wrote from a Spectacular and the Goblins at the Gate. I was able to pick up a page of Luke Ross art from a year or 2 ago. No Spider-Man on it. It's just Roderick and Norman on it, but I was like, don't need them. I just want those guys, and that's what made that storyline so special. So at least I have a piece of work that you have been part of.
Okay. I'm glad to hear that. I actually, at one point, I reached out to John Romita and I asked him, you know, how much do you want for one of the covers from that storyline? And he didn't want to part with them. And I said, I completely respect that. Yeah. He said he was very reluctant to sell his artwork. At least that stuff, those particular pieces. And I was like, okay, all right, fine. So those were the only things I would have wanted. from that storyline. Although Luke's stuff, I mean, I loved working with Luke, and I got to meet him a few years ago, and we like hugged each other like long lost brothers. Yeah, no, he really enjoyed working on Goblins at the Gate, and his stuff. He's gotten so much even better since then. I mean, he's just grown as an artist by leaps and bounds. I mean, his stuff back then was great, but he's even better now. But yeah, I would have loved to have owned one of those Goblins at the Gate covers. I do own an original piece of John Romita. Both John Romita Sr. and John Romita Jr., but it was stuff they did exclusively for me that I bought for a charity event that they were doing pencil sketches for.
Wow!
So I have a pencil sketch of half Peter, half Spider-Man by Sr., and I just have a typical, like, just a standard Spider-Man head by Jr. So I do have original artwork by both of them.
That's awesome.
But nothing that was actually published. Yeah.
It's still special.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Tremendously so.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, Glenn, thank you so much for taking the time, or should I say Gary? Thank you so much for taking the time. It's great to have you back. Great to talk about these books. And, again, in the case of STARLORD and Moon Knight, like, I had never read these books before. So it was nice to have a reason to, go into these books and experience them. And they were really fun reads. So thank you so much for turning me on to them.
I will stress again, I mean, the Moon Knight stuff, go back and find the original stuff, either in the first Epic collection or that hardcover that I told you about, Countdown to Dark. It'll blow your mind of just how good that original stuff is.
Okay.
Yeah. My heartiest recommendation.
Well, I will definitely do so. Well, again, thank you so much. I really appreciate all the time you've given me, not just today, but over the years. And it's been great having you as a friend of the show.
My pleasure. Talk to you next time.